Hi friends, it's Spence. Today I will be talking about all the books that I read for the month of January. So I read a total of 13 books for this month, or for the past month by the time you're seeing this, and that amounts to about 3,397 pages based on my story graph statistics. The very first book that I read for this year was actually written by a friend of mine, Isa Cataluna, and it is called Pillow Talk, and it is a collection of poems. It's very short, and these poems have a very personal quality to it. It's almost like you're reading someone's journal, which makes it really hard to rate a little bit because you can tell from Isa's writing that she really poured out her soul in this, and there are a lot of trigger warnings too because these poems are pretty much inspired by Isa's experience having bipolar 2 disorder and her journey and how that affected different aspects of her life, like love and just how she deals with challenges in her life. And I think in terms of how the artist or Isa expresses herself, there's much to be commended in this book because she's letting us really see her at her most vulnerable. Like I said, it feels like we're reading someone else's private diary. In terms of the writing, I will say I wish there was a little bit more imagery. But what really shines in Isa's writing is how much emotion, just like raw emotion that you can feel through her poetry. And I just absolutely enjoyed it for that. The second book that I read for this year is actually kind of a short story / novella, and it is The Julian Chapter by R.J. Palacio. This is one of 3 short stories connected to R.J. Palacio's more popular book, which is Wonder, and each of these stories kind of deal with different characters that we only get a little bit of a taste of in the book Wonder, and we're trying to kind of understand where they're coming from this time. So I'm not going to spoil Wonder, but basically Julian's character in the book Wonder is kind of like the bully figure in the story, and in this short story we kind of get his perspective, kind of why he is that way, as well as how he kind of grows, because by the end of the book we've seen some growth from Julian in Wonder, and we kind of understand how that exactly happened. I really appreciated this because even though we get to understand more of the bully's perspective, I think R.J. Palacio does a really good job of making sure that he's still accountable for the terrible things that he's done, while also kind of giving him a little bit of grace, kind of understanding him. And I think I've come to realize that those two are not necessarily mutually exclusive. You can provide grace to someone and still, hold them accountable for the negative actions that they've done. The third book that I read this year was actually Theodore Boone, Kid Lawyer by John Grisham. This is actually my first John Grisham novel, and I was not disappointed. I've seen this book around, growing up when I visit book sales and things of that sort. And I've always thought that, like most of John Grisham's books, these books are standalones. You follow one main character and you can kind of read each of the books on their own. And I was a little bit disappointed because I realized upon finishing the book that this is literally the first in a series, and this series covers one huge arc. That said, I still really enjoyed myself reading this. I kind of just picked it up on a whim, and I enjoyed it immensely. This is a middle grade mystery where we follow Theodore Boone, who is a kid lawyer of sorts. He was pretty much raised in a courthouse. Both of his parents are lawyers, and he loves being involved in the law and kind of understanding how all that works. And this story is kind of him finding out that the ongoing murder trial that's going on at the courthouse, he finds out incriminating evidence against the person who was being charged, but the prosecution was kind of having a hard time finding that evidence. And so this story kind of covers him trying to make sure that justice is served that way. I really enjoyed this. It was very edge of your seat. It was so much fun. I did not expect to like this because I don't really read, or I guess this is my first legal thriller, so to speak. The characters were likable, highly recommended. The next book that I read is Now We Are 6 by A.A. Milne. This is actually the 4th book in the Winnie the Pooh series. If you guys aren't familiar, the Winnie the Pooh series is a 4-book collection. The first 2 books are novels, and the second 2 books are poem collections. And this is the very last of those. Now We Are 6, kind of similar to the previous book, which I don't recall the title of. I wasn't a huge fan of. They were charming, they were cute, but these poems, there's kind of an absurdist quality to them that I don't really enjoy. I still thought it was decent. If you want to get into Winnie the Pooh, I highly recommend the novels. I can't really recommend the poems because I didn't really enjoy them. The next book that I read is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This is by far my favorite read of the year so far. And this is a mystery fantasy, or a fantasy mystery, however you want to call it. You've probably heard of this book before, but like many other reviewers have said, it's best to kind of just go into this completely blind, not knowing much about the story or what it's about. I think that's mainly because it is a mystery, and the way that things just kind of unfold and reveal themselves is just amazing. If you do want to get a little bit of an idea of what the premise is or what it is about, basically we follow our main character who is called Piranesi, and he lives in this huge house. The house is pretty much the world, right? And he's trying to study all of it. Like, he's trying to study all the rooms in this house, the pools that eventually come, the statues that are there, and he's trying to study everything about this house. He's trying to figure out like the statues and the rooms and the hallways and the other weird stuff that is in the house. And pretty much the entire book is basically a collection of journal entries from him. And that's really all you need to know. I want to give stuff away, but I think that will reduce the enjoyment that you will have had if you just go into this blindly. I had to say, so this is my first Susanna Clarke book. I haven't read her other popular book, Doctor Strange. Not Doctor Strange, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I absolutely love Susanna Clarke's writing, and again, like the mystery, the way it unfolds itself is just utterly mind-blowing. The next book that I read, unfortunately, is Twilight by Stephanie Meyer. I know some of you are probably asking, why did I decide to read this book in the year of our Lord 2022? The thing is, Twilight kind of defined a generation in much a similar way as Harry Potter did. And oh my goodness, a lot of you probably remember it, but when Twilight came out, everyone was crazy about it. Everyone was talking about it. It appealed to a lot of teenage girls, and everyone was just like swooning over Edward, and there was this whole feud about Team Edward or Team Jacob's vampire versus werewolves or whatever. And so this year I decided, you know what, I'm gonna find out. I'm gonna find out why exactly this is popular, or was popular I should say. And honestly, I don't get it. I don't get it. I mean, Twilight was probably the first of its kind, and the reason that I was not really impressed by it is because there's so many other similar fantasy romances that have come out since, and you know, I'm just like not impressed by this. But the thing is, I haven't really read any fantasy romance, so like I don't really have a benchmark to compare this against. If anything, this was the benchmark, like when it first came out, because it was like the first of its kind that was absolutely popular, was just booming, everyone was crazy about it. And before I basically trash on this book, I just want to say that it's not absolutely terrible. The writing, even though it was juvenile, and you can kind of tell that, you know, this was kind of Stephanie Meyer's like first venture into writing, or novel writing at least, it was still okay. Like, it was very easy to read, and I think that would appeal to a lot of readers, how, you know, just very accessible the writing style is. I also thought, even though the story is absolutely ridiculous and just pointless overall, it was still very entertaining. I mean, the fact that I didn't DNF this book, aside from the reason that I previously stated, being that I just wanted to find out what all the hype was about, that aside, I was still pretty much engaged and interested to some extent in finding out what really happens to all of these characters. But the thing is, I set the bar so low. Like, I expected all the problematic parts. I expected, you know, you all probably know, like, there was an appropriation of other cultures. There's some really bad mental health references. You know, a trashy plot overall. The thing is, I don't think people talk about how much of a red flag Edward Cullen is. Like, he is not your ideal person. Like, sure, he probably has the looks based on your taste, I don't know, but he has a terrible temper. He's a stalker. He is a consistent gaslighter, and I get that it is kind of part of the plot, you know, him trying to hide his vampire identity. But the thing is, it was a little bit concerning for me that a lot of teenagers thought that this was cute and like, oh my gosh, he's trying not to kill me. And a lot of people thought that was attractive. Like, I'm worried for all the people who are fans of this book. I'm worried for their well-being and like how they are with abusive relationships right now, because I'm telling you, your relationship is anything like that, you better get out of it right now. But alas, I can't tell you what to do. I also thought, this being a fantasy romance, there just wasn't enough build-up or enough, I guess, telling or showing how exactly Belle was attracted to Edward, other than that he had a crooked smile. And that was the only thing that I kind of wanted to get out of this book, just like make me feel giddy and all cutesy and like, oh my gosh, you're falling in love. But I got none of that. So I was less than displeased. The only really things I liked about this book was Charlie the dad, because he was the only normal person in this book. And then Alice, because Alice. And then Jacob. I really like Jacob's character. Although I heard that he is not such a great character in the future books, in this book at least, he was cool. I liked him. The next book is Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. I don't know why I changed my voice like that. So this is the first part of the Lord of the Rings. Technically, I think J.R.R. Tolkien considers the Lord of the Rings as just one novel divided into 3 parts, subdivided into 6 books, but whatever. Anyway, the Fellowship of the Ring, I don't think I need to explain it to you. It's the Lord of the Rings. Everyone knows about it. We follow hobbits and people trying to steal a ring. I've always been a Lord of the Rings fan because, you know, our dad indoctrinated us that way. And I must say, I get why a lot of people say that if you're already a fan of the movies and you want to read the books, but you're not much of a reader, it's okay if you don't read them because they're kind of difficult-ish to read. And I agree, I totally agree. I think the writing is a little bit difficult to get into. Tolkien uses a lot of words and really long sentences, but I thought that it was written really beautifully. I think it was something that I really enjoyed. I think the main reason that I enjoyed this story overall, or this experience, was because I listened to the audio version, which was recommended by the booktube goddess, who I follow, and they recommended listening to Phil Dragash unofficial like soundscape audiobook, and it is phenomenal. If you're a fan of the movies and you, again, if you're not much of a reader but you want to, you know, enhance your being a fan by reading the books, I don't know, I would highly recommend listening to Phil Dragash's unofficial audiobook. He uses like different voices for different characters, and I know a lot of audiobooks do that, but like he does it really well. He has all the accents, and he also uses music from the movies in their particular scenes all throughout the book. And it is really an experience, like when you're listening to the audiobook, you're pretty much like listening to the movie, and it's incredible. Even though there are deviations from the book in terms of like what the movie actually ended up being, it still was. It felt like the movie, and we're just like adding new parts that you haven't seen before. So I really, really enjoyed this. The next book that I read is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is a fantasy, adult fantasy, and this is the first in a series. Only the first book is out, I believe. I think the second book is coming out soon. The series is called Between Earth and Sky, and Black Sun is inspired by pre-Columbian, like Native American cultures. And in this book we follow, I think, 4 main POVs. The first one is Ciala, who is a teak, and she is much like a siren, and like she has the ability to calm the waters and to, I think at times, like, control the emotions of men. Then we also follow Serapio, who is destined to become the crow god. We follow Naranpa, who is the sun priest, who is trying to like kind of unite all her people. And then we have Okoa, and I really don't remember much about Okoa. Other than that, I really don't remember much about Okoa. The main gist, or the main premise of the story, is that Ciala is assigned to bring Serapio to, I don't even remember what the name of the place is called, to this city where he's destined to become kind of the crow god. And that place is where Naranpa is kind of like, you know, overseeing things. And I thought it was good. It was okay. I mean, it wasn't to my taste. I think if it was to my taste, I would have absolutely loved this book. It just wasn't something that normally appeals to me. There are a few things that this book does really good, though. Like, number one, the queer representation. This book is unapologetically queer. Like, there's so much queer rep. A lot of characters also use neo-pronouns. It was just really raw and authentic, and I really enjoyed how just like seamlessly it worked for the story. I also thought the plot was very cinematic. Like, I loved how each of the chapters ended, because there weren't really cliffhangers, but there were like, there was a lot of shock value put into the end of the chapters. Overall, though, I think this book suffered in terms of having multiple POVs because we don't really get to be invested in any one character except for maybe Ciala. And there were a lot of time jumps too. There were a lot of like flashbacks and flash forwards, and I think it was to the detriment of this book. Overall, I think it was still a solid fantasy book. However, it felt more like a prequel to a series than the first book in a series. It was just like setting things up without really having... I guess there is an arc to the story, but it wasn't... I don't feel like it really accomplished anything. Honestly, from reading this book, I don't think Rebecca Roanhorse is the author for me, although I do intend to read her middle grade book. But in terms of continuing this series, I honestly don't think I'm that invested to continue on. The next book that I read, oh my goodness, I'm already tired. The next book that I read is The Last Kiss on Earth by Max Brallier. Brallier? Is this French? Anyway, this is a middle grade book. It's also the first in a series of kind of short-ish books, and these books are kind of a blend of chapter books and graphic novels in that there's like a bunch of text and then there's a bunch of like comic-like illustrations. I thought this was a lot of fun. I think it was a good palate cleanser, and I think for the other books I'm not going to read them in succession because they're super lighthearted, they're super mind-numbing to a point, honestly. I think whenever I need a break from reading heavier books, I'm just going to pick the next book up, sort of a thing. But The Last Kiss on Earth is about this kid named Jack, and basically the end of the world just happened. There's a zombie apocalypse, and then after that there was a monster invasion, and basically his whole town is wiped except for kids. Like, all the adults just for some reason just like ran off, and now he's just trying to survive. And what this book does really well is how it made the end of the world super fun, because Jack is crazy. He's like over the top. He turns everything into a game. He turns survival into like all these like different tasks or like feats that he has to accomplish, like finding his best friend and saving his crush. I really enjoyed the first part of this book, but it eventually got old pretty quickly for me because I'm not really the target audience for this. I do enjoy middle grade, but this is, I guess, a little bit more, a little younger than I normally enjoy. This was adapted into a Netflix show, and I started it. I think I watched the first season, and I highly recommend it. It's really good, and it's a lot of fun. The next book / short story I read is Pluto by R.J. Palacio. This is the second of the short stories that I was talking about earlier, and Pluto follows kind of Augie, like the main character in Wonder, like his ex-best friend, like before he moved out. And I honestly didn't really enjoy this. I gave it 3 stars, but the main character wasn't really that endearing, and I don't know, because of that, I just didn't care about this story, really. There's really not much else to say about that. The next book that I read is Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys. So this was recommended by my friend Claudes from Book Boss and Claudes, and this is a historical fiction where we follow 4 main POVs during the time of World War II, and this is a story about a little-known tragedy of the Wilhelm Gustloff. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but it's a ship that carried 10,000 passengers, and then it sank. 9,000 people died. Yes, very tragic, and not a lot of people know about it. We follow 4 main characters: a medical assistant, a girl, the Polish girl with a pink hat, a deserter, or I guess someone who was supposed to be in the army but doesn't want to be, and then we also follow kind of a Nazi to be, and they're all teenagers. And I think comparing this to Black Sun, I think this time having like multiple POVs worked very well for the book, because the book is divided into very short chapters, and I don't know, there's like a lot of things just like packed into each of their perspectives that I was invested in pretty much all of them, even the Nazi to be, because he was kind of scary. I mean, he was really scary, like the way his thought processes worked, but I still was really interested in his character. All the characters were compelling. So many events in this story were really tragic and really moved me emotionally. I love Ruta Sepetys' writing, and I think that I'll definitely pick up more of her books in the future. Okay, we're getting close to the end. A Man Called Uve is the next book that I read. This is by Frederick Bachman. It's literary fiction / contemporary. I actually don't know it's pronounced. A lot of people say it's Ova or Uva, But I watched the trailer for the film adaptation, like in Swedish, and everyone was saying Uve, so I think that's how you say it. It's Man Called Uve. This was highly recommended by Murphy Napier, the very popular queen of booktube, and so I just had to pick it up, even though my first Frederick Bachman book, And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer, was really a disappointment when I read it. But this being Frederick Bachman's most popular work, I was like, okay, let's give this another chance, but if this doesn't work for me, I'm never going to read a Frederick Bachman book again. So this book is about a man called Uwe. And basically, it's an inspection of why he is the way he is. Because he's an old man, he's grumpy, he's super judgy, he hates people, essentially. And I think this is important to know about the book because a lot of people don't really talk about this, and I think this is a necessary trigger warning for this book, is that Uwe is depressed. Let's just put it that way. And he attempts suicide multiple times. And pretty much this story is about how each of those attempts have been prevented because he has just something else to live for. I do think it was handled really well. It was never romanticized in the book. But if you are interested in this, I will say that just like beware of that content warning because I was kind of not prepared for that. Although it didn't really trigger me. At the beginning, I thought it was just going to be a 3-star read. I was feeling kind of meh about the book. But the more we get to know Uwe and like see his experiences both past and present, the more he becomes endearing. But I think Uwe, yes, I absolutely love Uwe and he's definitely my favorite character in this book, but I think what really shined this book for me was the found family that he eventually gets. I think there's a beautiful inspection of humanity and how we view life and how we view relationships with other people. And this ended up being a 4.5, 4.5 star for me. It's a new favorite, absolutely loved it. It's kind of a comfort read. I hesitate to say that because of the trigger warning, but it is kind of a comfort read for me, and I'm definitely going to pick it up again if I am in need of, found family vibes. I would highly recommend this to fans of Kate DiCamillo's Because of Winn-Dixie, as well as if you're a fan of Mitch Albom, I think this story will appeal to you. Okay, finally, the last book that I read is a pretty short book. It's Arthur Spiderwicks' Field Guide to the Fantastical World Around You by Holly Black and Tony Derlitzy. This is a companion book to the Spiderwick Chronicles, which I absolutely love. This is kind of like a guide of all the fantastical creatures, and it was very beautifully illustrated, and it almost, I think if I was younger I would have believed everything in this book, but it almost made me believe that it actually exists, which who's to say that it isn't? And I loved it. I mean, there's nothing else to say other than it was really cool, really interesting book. Highly recommend. That is it for my January reading wrap-up. I haven't filmed in a while, so I'm pretty much out of touch. But if you have reached the end, thank you for watching. Please subscribe. And let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you're planning to read next and why you're excited about it. Or if you're not feeling chatty, just leave me a wave emoji, because Percy Jackson is going to be adapted soon, so you gotta get those waves going. Anyway, thanks for watching. Have a good day.